I'm South Shore Press News Director Stefan Mychajliw. This is the inaugural South Shore Press podcast. We're going to be talking national politics, state politics, and of course, what's happening in and around Suffolk County, and a lot to do with sports. And so joining us now on the inaugural South Shore Press podcast is financial guru John Taylor, and then, of course, South Shore Press sports director and nationally known betting expert Tom Barton. How are you guys?
Good. Good morning.
Well, you guys must be happy with a Yankees win. We can always start with that one. Tom, I don't know if we have any inkling that you're a Yankees fan. I know, John, you're a big Yankee fan. You guys must be pretty pleased beating the Boston Red Sox, moving on to the American League Championship Series.
You said wear whatever you want to the podcast. I figured I wear my pajamas. I slept in this last night because I was wearing it from the day before. No, I'm only kidding. I have enough of them that I could switch it out. But yeah, I figured I'd dress up for the podcast. I'm smiling ear to ear.
You don't shower. You normally sleep in that anyway. But I know, John, you're a Yankee fan too. So, that's got to be a huge win.
Yeah, I was there last night. I brought my kids and some of their buddies from their baseball team, and it was a super exciting game. I mean, that's a legendary game. I think we'll talk about that 10 years from now as the Schlittler game. Special moment for that kid. 12 strikeouts, 8 innings, no walks, just dominated. At a time where, if you look at the Yankees right now, the big question mark is the bullpen. You really feel uncomfortable going to the pen. So to get 8 innings out of Schlittler, just total domination, just really, took a lot of the air out of the balloon for the Red Sox. So huge win. I mean, we haven't eliminated the Red Sox in a playoff series since 2003. So it's nice to get the monkey off our back too.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, right, I don't know if you guys heard about this. You don't go after a guy's mother. If you don't know about this, Cam Schlittler, he's from Walpole, Massachusetts, right? He grew up a Red Sox fan, and his mom put on, her Twitter page and her socials, hey, we're rooting for the Yankees now. Obviously, I mean, your son's pitching for the Yankees. And apparently Boston fans ripped her, and so much so that she had to go silent. And Cam had mentioned this a little bit and threw a little breadcrumbs out there about how he was pumped up for it. And after the game, Boone said, yeah, well, what he was talking about before the dugout, in the dugout before the game, I'm not surprised he went out there and shoved like that because of that. And now everyone's kind of saying, hey, don't have to go after a guy's mother, man. What are you doing? But because they did, he went out there and he proved a point. And it was kind of cool to see that redemption.
Yeah, if the numbers weren't enough to make that a legendary game and to make this kid a legend, there's a video going around on social media this morning of him walking off the mound, I think at the end of the 8th inning, and he's all fired up, and you can see him say, fuck Boston, as he's walking off the mound.
Say welcome to be one of us, right? Give a hug, welcome to be one. You're now officially one of us.
Yeah, so
But did you guys expect anything less than Boston Red Sox fan to attack the guy's mom?
No.
I mean, it's par for the course.
No, of course. Filthy fan base, horrible people generally, in a baseball sense.
Tell us how you really feel. All right, we're going to shift gears and we'll talk sports a little later in the program too, because Tom, obviously, again, you are not only the South Shore Press sports director, but you're also a nationally known sports betting expert. So we'll talk about that. And let's start with some national politics too. I want to pick both of your brains on this government shutdown. Republicans are calling it the Schumer shutdown, and they should. When Joe Biden was president, they voted numerous times for continuing resolutions. It was no problem keeping the government open when Joe Biden was president. But all of a sudden, Democrats are doubling down on healthcare for illegal immigrants. President Trump is in office, and boom, they're shutting down the government. So, John and Tom, I'm curious, guys. John, we can start with you. Just what are your thoughts in general, 30,000-foot view here of what's happening now in the federal government?
Well, I mean, as it relates to the shutdown, when was the last time the government passed a budget? We've been on the CR train for a very long time, and we get into these moments where we need to pass another CR and raise the debt limit, and it's purely a matter of political theater. And the question at the moment, or at any moment where these CRs come up, is which party feels like they have the political winds at their backs, and then they use the CR as a tool to leverage the other side to obtain something. And at this moment, I think the president certainly believes that the political winds are at his back, he's therefore comfortable to let this thing stay closed for a little while. I think at the end of the day, the government staying shut for really any amount of time has very little consequence to anything. And you can see how the market is responding this week. I mean, it's just kind of a non-factor. And the Democrats are in a tricky spot. I mean, they're trying to make it about healthcare. They're trying to make it about the typical things that they want to make it about. But you have an interesting, kind of sub dynamic going on between the Schumers of the Democrat Party and the AOCs and sort of the fringe radicals who, are trying to push Schumer to do things that he might not otherwise do. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if this thing stayed closed longer than anyone would have suspected. But I think at the end of the day, it's political theater. Well, unfortunately, because what they really need to do is be negotiating actual outcomes for some of these big budget items that are creating the structural deficit problem that we have.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned theater because, Tom, I know you're a big guy in social media. You use the Twitter machine all the time for the South Shore Press, a lot of your columns. You're on Twitter a lot. In the theater now, and I think it's hilarious. I really do. Whereas like J.D. Vance and President Trump are starting the sombrero memes when it comes to Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer and Democrats. And I mean, the purpose behind it is, of course, to engage voters, but the message out like they're shutting down the government to give illegal immigrants free health care. So, Tom, I'm just curious. You must have seen this. And just what are your thoughts on these memes going viral?
I mean, I think I got my Halloween costume, right? I'm gonna go door to door. Oh, are you, celebrating Taco Tuesday? No. I'm Schumer. Here we go. Or I'm Hakeem Jeffries or whatever it is. You've even seen those. They have the fake Halloween costumes. Look, at the end of the day, I think the reality is that it's almost like A Few Good Men, right? Where back in the movie, where he wants to say it. They want to say, yes, we are giving money for illegals. They want to say we are giving all of this back to illegals, but they can't really say it. So it's kind of the memes and the political theater and Twitter and even back on their own CNN and MSNBC, they're being backed into a corner where they're basically saying exactly what the Republicans are accusing them of. You're doing this, you're shutting down the government so you can benefit the illegal aliens, the illegal immigrants, whatever you want to call them. And it is kind of backfiring on the Democrats. And a lot of it is because of the social media aspect of it, which is now, everybody is not afraid to say things. Everyone's not afraid to kind of have fun and have memes, and Trump's going out there because it's not compromised like it was just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and two thoughts on the sombrero meme. One, the president and his team do a remarkable job of baiting the Democrats into their playbook response to certain things. They've developed over the last decade this instinctual response to things like the sombrero, which is we're going to say it's racist and try to condemn you for being racist. And one of the things that has occurred over the last 9 months is the cultural winds have shifted on that stuff. America's not into the everything's racist game anymore. So when you have what is objectively just a very funny meme with Hakeem Jeffries wearing a sombrero, which the subtext is Hakeem Jeffries is negotiating on behalf of the Mexicans is kind of the idea, but he also knows that they're going to respond by saying it's racist, which people are dismissing, but also you've had a lot of conversation over the last few days of, well, why exactly is it racist? What's racist about it? It'd be hard for anyone to explain why that's racist. You have an African American man wearing a sombrero. Like, what's the racist thing? I don't even know what it would be. But the second thing I would just say, and part of what the role of the media should be, is there's been this debate about whether the Democrats are attempting to secure health care for illegal immigrants. You've had politicians on both sides of the aisle make declarative statements that the Democrats are saying, no, federal health dollars are not allowed to go to legal immigrants. And you've had the vice president and others saying that's precisely what they're trying to do, is authorize health care for illegal immigrants. And as a casual consumer or a casual citizen trying to do research on that, look, if you spend 10 minutes trying to investigate that, the truth of the matter is there's very little federal dollars that are supposed to be able to go to illegal immigrants. I personally would wonder in states like California or maybe even New York, where illegal immigrants are able to obtain various forms of identification, can they use those IDs to, fraudulently apply for federal health dollars? But most of the stated programs, the healthcare for illegal immigrants, are state dollars, which really wouldn't be part of this conversation at all. So it's a confusing situation, I think, for many people to understand what exactly the truth is here.
But I thought it was interesting. Jake Tapper, of all people, I never thought like Jake Tapper would be the guy, but he actually had Hakeem Jeffries on because, John, it goes to your point of the minimal amount of dollars going towards healthcare for illegals. And Jake Tapper had,
in theory, yeah.
right. And Tapper had on Jeffries. And it was really interesting because right away, Tapper says, oh, the Republican argument is this. And right away, Jeffries jumped in and goes, well, that's a lie. And then Tapper goes, well, and he gave the very specific instance of where the Democrats were fighting for a bill that would allow illegals to get healthcare in hospitals. So like, I'm really surprised that media is actually holding, for the most part, I think in some cases, like Democrats' feet to the fire saying, yeah, you are fighting for healthcare for illegals. That's what it's all about. And, and kudos to the Trump team. I mean, the memes are just absolutely hilarious. John, I want to pick your brain too on something you said before. It was really interesting because when it comes to the shutdown, like everything's being portrayed as doom and gloom. I flew to see you the other day, no problems at the airport, but if you watch TV, you're thinking, wow, these folks aren't getting paid. There's long lines, things of that nature. You would think like the entire world is on fire. And something you mentioned before in this podcast was, look, the markets really aren't reacting in a bad way. Can you share with our listeners and viewers about the fact that, yeah, the federal government shut down, but for the most part, there really is no big impact on the markets?
Well, I mean, look, there's precedent at this point for these shutdowns. We've had them over the last 20 years. We've had, several of these. Heretofore, they've all been short. Heretofore, everybody's gotten back pay. And of course, they keep all, you mentioned the airports, they keep all the critical services intact. So, it's not like our military goes home while the shutdown takes place. So all the critical functions are continuing to exist in anticipation of this being short. So, the market certainly is taking the view that this will be a non-issue and will be resolved quickly. The market's taking that view because that is the precedent. I personally think that there's a much greater likelihood than in past instances that this drags out and actually starts becoming a problem. I'm not, maybe you guys know the answer to this, but there's been speculation floated that the Trump administration intends to use some of the loopholes that exist that I'm not familiar with. That during the in the instance of a shutdown, can we use the shutdown as a means to reduce headcount in the federal government? And as we all know, it's very difficult for the federal government or agencies in the federal government to fire federal employees. And there's been some speculation that the shutdown creates an opportunity for the president to do that. And if you start going down that path where this becomes prolonged and, were he to dismiss a certain amount of people, I suspect Schumer would use that as a bargaining chip to say, well, no, now I will only agree to this if you return those employees, which the president almost certainly will not agree to. Does that get litigated? And then the litigation causes the shutdown to drag on for longer than it otherwise would. Those are some of my thoughts on it.
So, Tom, being the sports betting expert and being the sports director of the South Shore Press, I mean, you're actually the perfect guy to ask this question to. John's hardcore into politics. I'm hardcore into politics. Like I live it, I breathe it, I die it. So like as much of an, I guess, independent observer as you are, I mean, you're a sports betting guy. You're the sports writer of the South Shore Press. Like, do you see in any way, shape, or form your life or your family or anyone being impacted by this government shutdown?
Absolutely not. Other than people that that might work in government that you just happen to know, friends or family or something like that. No, absolutely not. You would generally wake up and most people will not even know that there's a shutdown. I could tell you, my sister's somebody that's just not really into politics at all. She has no idea. She's a school teacher. Her daughters are both school teachers. More than likely, they have no idea that the shutdown is even happening. Nobody's going to be affected unless, like John said, if it does really play out and go longer, and then there's multiple layers to this, maybe people will start kind of going, oh yeah, I heard about that shutdown and it affected me here and here. But no, I'm going to wake up tomorrow. I'm going to, watch the Yankees, watch college football. Sunday's going to be an NFL Sunday. Go out, try to make enough money to feed my family. And that's what every American's doing, where they're looking out there and they think that this is a big, giant deal. It's not to the average American. It really isn't.
Is that what you tell your clients when you have picks for the NFL that like, hey man, if I don't win, my kids in the car don't eat this week? Is that your play?
I make sure that that's one of the few things I do. I said, listen, I used to have a commercial that was running and I said, at Tom Barton Sports, I'm not going to be the guy that is going to buy you a Lexus next weekend, but I could probably make that payment for you, right? Make you enough. Don't overextend yourself. Don't ever put yourself behind the 8 ball. Just make enough to make a happy living, make enough to make a happy little extra in this, because guys, look, it is a problem if you go too far down the road. So you try to make sure that everybody has reasonable expectations.
Well, you might, and many other New Yorkers might have a lot more money in your pockets. That's going to be our next news topic, is this rebate check from New York State Governor Kathy Hochul. Technically, it's from all of us who pay taxes in New York State. It's just outrageous to me, whereas New York State is facing record deficits. I mean, the budget's never been bigger. The budget is $254 billion with a B. $254 billion. Hochul is saying this year, because of the so-called Trump economy, that taxpayers are suffering. But yet New York State, so $750 million deficit this year. The out-year deficits are in the $1 billion range. And now Hochul is sending New York State taxpayers these so-called inflation refund checks. I mean, $400 to anyone who fills out a tax form or fills taxes. So John, I'm just curious, big picture here. Again, you're a numbers guy. What are your thoughts on this Hochul inflation rebate check?
Well, in a classic economic sense, Milton Friedman was a big advocate of the idea that inflation simply comes down to the supply of money. And when the supply of money goes up, the prices of things go up, which is a very intuitive and logical construct. It's perhaps more complicated than that, but it's as a basic premise is likely accurate. So the idea, and you've seen this from Democrats around the country. Gavin Newsom tried to do something similar in California. The idea that because we are spending money so aggressively, inflation is ripping. And this goes back to the IRA, and the Biden administration really is what catalyzed the hyperinflation we've had over the last 5 years. The idea that we're going to address it by giving more money to people is a circular loop. It makes no sense. And look, and one of the things, from an economic standpoint, people need to understand that the most damaging and most regressive form of taxation is inflation. So the increase to the money supply that goes hand in hand with deficit spending is the driver of inflation, and that is crippling to the bottom half of Americans. Ironically, it's a boon for the wealthiest Americans, because inflation causes the price of assets to go up, and the wealthiest Americans own assets. So the inflation in many instances is a very big positive for the top half of the population. So this Hochul thing, where we're going to give $400, I think it's $400 to, I think she said 8 million New York taxpayers, likely causes inflation to go up on the margin. It's, relatively small amount of money cumulatively. And one of the questions that I've wondered to myself is, who is getting these checks? And, again, we're going back to the conversation we had a moment ago about the shutdown and our illegal immigrants getting health care. My question when I saw this Hochul thing is, what are the protections in place to prevent these tax dollars? And Stefan, as you said, these are taxpayers in New York, 3 of us, giving money to the state of New York, who's now taking it and redistributing it to 8 million people. And the question is,
there you go.
Who are these 8 million people? Are they, and does it include illegal immigrants? I spent a cursory amount of time looking into that to understand, how do you qualify? It sounds like she's using the 2023 tax filings, as the Democrats like to remind us all the time. Illegal immigrants do pay income taxes in some instances. So almost certainly there are illegal immigrants benefiting from this program. The question is, of the 8 million checks that are going out, what percentage of those are going to illegals? Look, if you're telling me that the poor single mother in New York City who's being smoked by this inflation situation. We're going to give her $400 to help her make her grocery payments. I think all of us can probably get on board with that to some degree, despite the inflationary implications of it. If you're telling me that half of this money is going to illegals who are also already getting free housing and healthcare and every other perk under the sun, I think all of us would take great issue with that.
But John, isn't it interesting too? Because people have to pay, and I don't know if they know this, John, but people have to pay federal taxes on their New York State inflation refund check. So isn't it interesting or ironic that like Hochul's blasting the Trump administration saying, hey, we've got to give people money in their pockets because of this. And then a big portion of it is going to be taken out in federal taxes and then sent basically into the control of the Trump administration. Isn't that pretty much on the money?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I didn't consider that. I mean, I'm guessing the marginal tax rate for these folks getting these checks is quite low. But yeah, you're talking about $80 going to the Trump administration, which in some part gets redistributed back to New York, to do with what they will. But yeah, that's an interesting point.
Tom, let's swing to you because obviously you've got kids. I have young kids. I mean, is there like a conflicted feeling amongst us conservatives that like, hey, it's a couple $100, it might help, but when it comes to the money itself, it's our money. It's money that we paid in taxes that New York State is basically giving us back our own money. And then if we're facing a $750 million deficit, and then again, Hochul's predicting above B with $1 billion deficit in the out years, it's kind of like, well, why are you giving us back our own money and then making an even bigger hole?
Well, I think you said a great word there. Is the word, the federal deficit or the New York State deficit. Nobody cares. Generally speaking, people that are getting the $400 back, they just don't care. My $400, if it comes in the mail, I'll probably take the family out to dinner. Yeah, I mean, you're going to spend it, you're going to put it back into the economy. But I always ask the question, and this is going back to more for you guys. I always ask the question, why? Right? Why is she doing this? Is she really going to the lowest common denominator here? And the lowest common denominator is going, wow, she gave me $400. She's the greatest governor ever. I mean, are there really people out there that are thinking that? Or is it, kind of just so she can go out there and say, look, I did this? The question of why is really kind of getting me. Hey, I'll take the $400. Great. We'll go out to a nice dinner. Maybe I'll be able to go buy a Yankee tickets and sit next to John there. That would be great, right? With $400, that's fantastic. But at the end of the day, it's not going to make or break anybody. I just want to know why she's doing it now. Like, what kind of favor does she think it's going to buy her because you're getting $400? Well,
I think that number one, if you got a $400 check in the mail, I think you're going to bet it on the Yankees to win.
I'm going to bet a lot more than that, John.
But the circular loop of politics is that you have a group of people who actively create the problems, and then they come up with asinine solutions to the problems they created. The inflation is the direct result of the deficit spending. That, of course, this is not a Hochul thing necessarily, because a lot of it's at the federal government, but it's also true at the New York State level. And we're somehow going to solve that problem by giving people money that's going to be inflationary. And again, you think about this, the circular loop of this. You have Mamdani running for mayor in New York City, seems at the moment likely to become the mayor of New York City, talking about a bunch of things that will certainly drive hyperinflation. So you imagine for a moment Mamdani somehow succeeds in creating state or city-owned grocery stores with fixed pricing, which there's infinite predicate for people trying to do things like that through the course of history. That will cause all the other grocery stores to go out of business. That will cause therefore the supply of groceries to plummet, therefore causing the price of groceries to skyrocket. That is the sort of thing that creates inflation. And then you fast forward 2 years from now, and I guess you can imagine Hochul coming out with even more free cash to people to help them pay for the groceries whose prices have just skyrocketed. It would be better to elect people who don't create these problems in the first place, and we wouldn't be in stage 7 of the circular loop of insanity.
Well, let's speaking of insanity, I mean, you mentioned Mamdani. I mean, he's earned the nickname Commie Mamdani, the Big Apple. You know, a lot of people think, okay, if this guy's elected in New York City, it's going to have zero impact. New York's going to turn into a massive dumpster fire. The guy you mentioned, John, government-run grocery stores, free buses, which could basically cost like the MTA and technically the government hundreds of millions of dollars. He's talking about spending like tens of millions of dollars on turning New York City into like this trans surgery haven for young teens, basically. So, John, from a purely numbers perspective, can you like give us a financial perspective of, sure, he may destroy New York City, but we're going to feel that across New York State and in Suffolk County?
Well, I mean, the tax base for the state is heavily weighted towards New York City and Manhattan in particular. So, you know, and you've seen this in California and New York already to some degree post-COVID, where you've had, you know, for reasons related to DEI in schools or, you know, COVID mandates, you've seen this outflow of people from California and New York to places like Texas and Florida. And you look at the weighting of those humans who have left those states, it's heavily skewed towards the highest earners. So, you know, so this amplifies the deficit dynamic that you create. You know, if Mamdani were to be elected, which I think the base case has to be that he will be, if he were to be successful in doing some of the things he talks about, which, you know, the mayor has a lot of power in New York City, particularly with some of the city apparatus already controlled by these sorts of lunatics. So you put Mamdani on top of that, it's likely he'll be successful in doing many of the things he talks about. It's going to be highly destructive to the standard of living. You know, you talk about some of the things he's talking about doing with the police force. You know, crime is going to skyrocket. You know, you can imagine, you know, NYPD resigning because of some of the things he's talking about. So you have a crime situation, you have a cost of living situation. He's talking about massive redistribution of wealth through taxation of the rich and redistributing it to the poor. You know, so any of the, you know, wealthiest New York taxpayers who haven't found a good reason to leave yet, under de Blasio, you know, if you go back over the last 10, you know, de Blasio was elected and probably 12 years ago. You know, if you didn't think de Blasio was bad, this guy makes de Blasio look like Ronald Reagan. So, you know, I think if he does the things he's talking about, you're going to see massive outflow of the tax base from New York to, you know, maybe they go to New Jersey if they get this guy elected in New Jersey, but probably to Florida. And, you know, that now you've got a serious problem in your hands because the state needs to run some semblance of a balanced budget. And if you had 10, 20, 30% of the tax base go away, you know, what is she going to do? I don't know what Hochul would do in that case. But I mean, no one, of course, is thinking that far ahead. I suspect she'll print more checks and give money to people. Would be the end.
Yeah, but she owns it now. I mean, she bent the knee to Commie Mamdani. She endorsed him. There's no question. You know, I remember her own lieutenant governor, Antonio Delgado, former congressman. He is currently Kathy Hochul's lieutenant governor, who decided, you know what? I'm not happy with the direction she's moving in the state. I'm going to run against her. And of course, Hochul took away the guy's phone, took away his detail, took away his office. He's got like a Dixie cup and string where he's got to communicate with people. But she totally bent the knee to Commie Mamdani and made that political decision of, okay, I'm going to double down on this guy. Because if I don't, then Mamdani's people are all going to get behind Delgado and she's toast in a primary. So all those crazy things you talked about, John, I think Governor Hochul basically owns that for endorsing him. And we all know, a huge chunk of the New York City budget comes from New York State. So all of these radical, progressive, loony, left-wing lunatic ideas, they're going to have to be funded by Kathy Hochul in New York State. It just blows my mind. You know, again, my family fled a communist regime to come to America. And the horror stories of my grandparents, my baba, my dida, my entire family telling me what they did to come to America. And now New York City is voting for that. My grandparents, God bless their soul, and my entire family rolling in their graves about it. So Tom, again, you're the perfect guy to talk about this because you're the sports guy. Again, not so immense and immersed as we are when it comes to politics. So Tom, when you talk to folks about this guy, oh, this Mamdani, what are people saying? Just I'm curious, in your circle, about this communist who's about to become New York mayor.
You know, it's kind of funny. I'm glad you asked that because it's one of two things, and it is a direct one of two things. Either, well, it's New York City and it doesn't affect us here on Long Island, and you just roll your eyes and you go, okay, I could explain to you how. Or you have the other side to that, and the other side to that is sheer and utter terror. I talk about, I worked in New York City for 11 years. My wife worked in New York City for 4 years. We used to go constantly. Now you get kids and things like that, but that nature, you don't go as much. But it's a different animal. It's almost going back to where you don't want to take the kids. Oh, Christmas is coming up. Is it going to be safe enough? Oh, we got to go out there and we got to watch out. We got to look over. I can only imagine what it's going to be in 2 years. And there is that terror of people going, man, they're taking the city away. When will it creep in? And how much until Long Island's just engulfed and that's it? I know more people looking at property. You mentioned in Florida. More people looking in property in Florida now than ever before. And we know Florida is just an extension of New York. So you really do. You have two facets of people that are actually in my life. It's either sheer terror of what's coming, or thank goodness it's only New York City because it's not affecting us. They haven't really understood yet that it will affect everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because people of our age, we're all the three of us are roughly the same age. Through our lifetime, as much as we've made a lot about politics, through our lifetime, I think we've all just grown accustomed to the idea that, yeah, I prefer, Bush to Clinton or whoever. But politics really hasn't had that meaningful an impact on our day-to-day lives until just recently. So people of our age, which is kind of the prime voting demographic for these parties, you have this still instinctual orientation to things like Mamdani to say, yeah, it seems crazy, but it probably won't matter. Now, over the last decade, you've seen DAs start to get hijacked by some of the left-wing progressives, and that has had a real impact on people's lives in the form of crime and law enforcement. That, of course, trickles into the police force and the community's relationship to the police force. Mamdani is just, the furthest any of them have gone on this spectrum. He's a very, very extreme individual who's proposing to do, and if he were elected, would have the power to accomplish some very extreme things that are going to certainly have very meaningful effects on the lives of people in New York City. I just looked it up. New York City is about half of the state tax base. So, were that to get eviscerated in any meaningful way, the budgets of either the federal government or the states, it's no different really than any of us balancing our checkbooks. There's revenue and there's costs. So when the revenue goes down, you either, to balance the budget, either need to raise the revenue, and in this case, the only way to do that would be to increase taxes, or you cut costs. The Democrats have proven, and the Republicans to some degree, have proven that they're not going to cut costs. So the only choice that'll be available if you saw 5 or 10% of the tax base leave to Florida would be to increase taxes on everybody else. And so it's a really scary situation in New York. You find yourself. I've lived in New York City. You have not presently, but I've spent a great deal of my life in New York City, and you wonder, like, who the hell is voting for this guy? But these sorts of folks just keep getting elected. And your point about Hochul, Stefan, about bending the knee. Look, the Republicans had their Tea Party moment 15, 20 years ago, where, we were trying to walk this line of, bending to the Tea Party, who were asking for what appeared at the time to be some more extreme things policy-wise. And the Democrats are having that moment right now. I mean, Hochul, certainly relative to Mamdani, is a moderate. And the fact that she's, bending the knee to a guy like this is pure politics. I mean, because these guys have an issue on their hands, as we did with the Tea Party in the primaries, where the voter turnout, unfortunately, is very low. And the most engaged primary voters are the most extreme people on both sides of the aisle. So these left-wing, socialist Marxists are the people who vote in these primaries. So you have guys like Schumer and Hochul, and I've met Schumer. He's actually a pretty reasonable person when you meet him one-on-one. But the reason a guy like that goes on TV and says crazy things, or in Hochul's case, the reason she goes on TV and endorses Mamdani is she has to appeal to these primary voters. And if she doesn't, she'll be primaried by someone crazy like Mamdani. So, I think all of us as New York State taxpayers, you kind of like Hochul endorsing Mamdani, because if she didn't, she would be replaced by someone like Mamdani. And then you've got, I think Mamdani's a problem already, but it would be a problem times infinity if you had a governor in place like Mamdani.
But isn't it interesting though, John and Tom, like I think of my late mother, she passed away. I'm the former Erie County Controller. I served for 9 years in that elected position. And she passed away right after I took office. And I'll never forget it. She was a hardcore Democrat. Like my mom would be considered a Kennedy Democrat, pro-life, pro-labor, but like not batshit crazy like the AOCs or the commie Mamdanis. And I'll never forget when I first ran, because I was on the conservative line, the independence line, and the Republican line. And I remember her come up to me for election day and she's like, honey, I don't know what I'm going to do. I never voted for a Republican before. And I'm like, holy shit, if my mother's not voting for me, I'm in trouble. I'm like, but you can vote for me on the conservative or the independent side. She goes, oh, thank God. But she was like a normal Democrat, guys. Like she was not this whole okay, defund the police, give healthcare toward illegals. So guys, don't you think that's kind of like the state of the Democratic Party today, where these so-called Reagan Democrats like my mom, there's no place for them in today's Democratic Party since it's been hijacked by AOC and Kami Mamdani.
Well, I wonder. I mean, it's interesting in the modern day and age of social media, we have access to so much information. I mean, I understand that idea. And my grandmother would probably be the same in that she goes into the voting booth, she votes for the same party every year. She's not terribly informed on policy stuff. Is there still a significant portion of the voter base? I guess there is, because guys like Mamdani are getting elected, who simply vote for their party, period. And it doesn't matter what's going on. They just vote for Democrats because they vote for Democrats. I don't personally know anyone who would say something like that, but although maybe my grandmother, she might say something like that. But in this day and age where you have access to so much information, like it's not a secret what Mamdani's saying. You can imagine 30 years ago, a guy like Mamdani's running for office. Who the hell knows what this guy stands for? Now you've got an influx. You can watch infinite videos of this guy saying the things he intends to do. And I guess to Mamdani's credit, he's not lying about it. He's telling you precisely what he intends to do. So the folks who just say, "Well, I vote for Democrats," is that really the reason they're voting for this guy? I don't know.
It's like, sir, you said the quiet part out loud. Like you said that out loud. But yeah, it reminds me of the old school. I mean, again, the three of us are old enough to remember the old school voting machines in New York State, where you had to pull the lever, big curtain, and you had to punch or flick a little button. And Democrats can, my mom could go in and basically take a yardstick and just be boop, and just vote Democrat the entire line.
Yeah, right.
And that's what she did. That's exactly what she did.
Look, the Mamdani thing, I mean, the thing that's a head scratcher to me, because again, at the presidential level, if you say, well, I like Obama instead of Trump, or Biden instead of Trump, or Hillary instead of Trump, I can kind of get on board with the idea that people may think the president doesn't have that much of an impact on their lives. So they're just playing team sports with their vote and saying, I'm a Democrat, therefore I vote for this guy. In the Mamdani thing, the thing that's just a head scratcher to me about New York City, I lived in New York City from Giuliani through Bloomberg and into the first half of de Blasio. And nobody could deny the impact on the day-to-day lives of the people living in New York City through that transition. You went from Giuliani, where you could literally fall asleep on the sidewalk in Times Square and be completely safe, to Bloomberg, who I think did a nice job of maintaining the status quo of what Giuliani had created, to de Blasio, who again, like Mamdani, didn't make any secret about what he intended to do, and literally turned the city into a hellscape, where the crime is crazy. I mean, you walk around the city, even in Manhattan, there's a feeling of it not being safe, because the homeless population is all over the place. Many of those people are clearly on some kind of narcotic and mentally ill. You have marijuana smoke everywhere, all over the place. And that's a direct result of the guy you voted in to be mayor. So once I can understand, you didn't like Bloomberg, so you voted in de Blasio. He, got a cool looking family. Maybe I like that. But then your life changed. Then you voted him in a couple more times, and now you have de Blasio times 10. and somehow the voting base doesn't look the other way. I mean, Trump, famously said in 2016, "What the hell do you have to lose?" Like, I get it, you don't want to vote for a Republican, but gee, this party's clearly destroying the city, and this guy's talking about the death shot on the city. So how is he getting the vote? Ironically, our best hope may be good old Governor Cuomo riding to our rescue. I don't know.
Shocking. Absolutely shocking. Like, yeah, I'll take the guy that killed seniors
Yeah.
in nursing homes during COVID. But yeah, you're right. Like, people are like, I'll take that guy over the raging communists. Like, yeah, Cuomo was accused of sexually harassing women. He had to resign in disgrace, and he killed seniors in nursing homes. That's my guy. Like, people are saying that now. It's bananas. And Tom, whenever you go to the city, do you go on a black tar heroin bender and fall asleep and don't feel safe anymore?
Yeah, just about. I mean, honestly, you could walk from, my old building was on Madison Avenue, 49th and Madison, and I used to walk every single night, to Madison Square Garden, and then I would go upstairs at Penn Plaza, and I've done that walk multiple times over the last 2 or 3 years. And
Tom, what years do we making that walk?
Let's see, I got hired in '99. And I was there for 11 years, so just after.
Same thing. That's Giuliani,
yes,
and Bloomberg.
And I made the walk every night. I worked overnights, so I was making the walk. I was going out to lunch at 3 o'clock. No fear at all. Now, if you don't get mugged, you're going to get high. That's for sure. I mean, you said, John, the smoke is just out of control. There's just weed trucks set up, and imagine Times Square being unsafe, but it is. It's in a position where it's unsafe. I used to take the train and deliver tickets, sporting events tickets, up to the Bronx and feel okay. I mean, it was what it was. I felt fine. Now you can't take it from Midtown to Madison Square Garden. You just can't. Everything there is changed. The vibe has changed. And, to your point, he said he was going to do it. And he's going to continue this. They look at places like Dearborn, Michigan, and they don't look like we look at it in fear of, this is not a good sign. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of crime. They look at it like, oh no, that's what we want. That's what we're striving for. That's what we're going to go and get. And you called it a death shot, John. I mean, I really don't know if New York can ever recover. I think that if he is elected, it is the end of New York City as we know it, even though it kind of already is.
Now, you ask yourself, when you see things like this, like it's objectively a bad idea. Like, you'd have a hard time explaining, how it's good to let an army of homeless dudes live on the streets. We're going to give them free needles and heroin to make sure they're as crazy and violent as possible. And then we're going to make sure all the kids walking around have marijuana joints in their hand. You'd be hard pressed to find someone who could explain to you why that's a good idea. So you'd ask yourself, well, why are you choosing to do that? And I think it comes back to the Hochul $400, rebate thing, where I think these guys have the notion that if they create anarchy, they can show up with solutions that might be politically advantageous. So, so one of you mentioned before, why is she giving free money? I think there's infinite precedent throughout history, not just in the United States, but globally, that it's very politically popular to give people free money. So, giving people $400 checks probably polls well for Hochul. One of the things I also try to investigate, a lot of these free money programs have some grift attached to it. So who's the firm that gets hired to administer the $400 checks? Are there fees coming out of that program? Would be the suspicion that I always have when I see things like that. But look, the citizenry gets the government they deserve. But at the end of the day, we might all raise an eyebrow and be skeptical about the validity of some of the election results, but there's no question, in my mind at least, that the Mamdani has the majority of the voting support in New York City. So you get what you deserve. And again, if you got tricked into voting for Obama in 2008, I can understand that. It's hard for me to be sympathetic to an electorate that votes in this guy, knowing what de Blasio just did, and this guy's making no secret about the fact that he's going to be de Blasio times 10. So we're going to have to deal with the consequence of that on the other side of whatever damage he's about to do.
John, can I interject really quick? Okay,
of course.
It's just great what you said, because you said, I don't understand, right? And I don't understand how they think it's a good idea. Isn't that the political climate that we're in now? It's not Democrat, Republican. Well, I have most of the things were the same on, but like it used to be. Well, there's a couple of issues here, a couple of issues there. No, we're dealing with absolute ideology differences where we, as Republicans or conservatives or this side of the aisle, will say, just physically can't get our head around that it's a good idea to let 8-year-olds decide to chop off their penises, right? We just can't get behind that. Wait, what are you talking about? It's insane to us. It's insane to us to sit back and go back to COVID and think, you can have a supermarket open, but if you stand, 8 feet behind the next person, it's perfectly okay. The idea that you're going to shut down people's businesses, make them still pay taxes, and pay functioning things of this nature, but you're going to let this business be open. I mean, just the political climate that we're in. Is it okay? If you go and you look at Charlie Kirk gets shot in the neck. I don't care what your political affiliation. This is a man who had children, and you have people running to villainize him and then applaud it. We are in completely different sides of the ideology and spiritual spectrum, where you said it. We can't understand. Why would you vote for this? And they've just been continuously voting on that side of the almost ludicrous notions.
Yeah, I mean, in the hijacking of politics, if you choose to believe that somebody has nefarious intention, like I am trying to destroy America, and here's how I'm going to do it.
Yes.
And we're kind of in a post-kinetic war period where, am I going to invade mainland America with tanks? That is probably a tough thing to accomplish. So can I do it through manipulating their own rules and laws against them and trying to shift the culture? The simplest answer is often the correct answer, and like that seems to explain a decent chunk of what's happened over the last 10 years. Is there some force, whether it's a foreign power or someone inside our own country, is behind this stuff? But we've jumped the shark on the first phase of that hijacking, where I can advocate for things like, I'm going to close the country down in COVID and make your business be closed. And I'm also going to allow BLM riots in the street. But I'm going to offer you an explanation that at least passes a smell test. In COVID, it was a medical emergency, and they used that as the basis to explain every policy decision they were making, even in the face of some very faulty logic. At the time was faulty logic, and with perfect hindsight now is kind of ridiculous. But now, as you're pointing out, some of the stuff, we're now in phase 2 of this, where the things they're advocating for, there's not even a plausible explanation. I mean, I would love to have someone on this podcast to explain to us. You mentioned 8-year-olds cutting off their penises. That may be a crude version of how we would phrase it, but I tend to agree with you. I don't think you'd be able to find somebody who could sit here on this show and explain to us why they think that's a good idea. There's no explanation. The Mamdani thing, what he's talking about, is kind of in that category of there's really no explanation. If you dig into Mamdani, and I mean, I've spent some time on this over the last few months, because you'd say, like, who is it that would like to destroy New York City? Again, I can make a loose argument that perhaps Hochul thinks, well, if we create enough destruction, I could ride to the rescue with free money and all these things, and it'd be anarchy and destruction of New York would be politically advantageous. Perhaps that's really a pretty risky political strategy. Stefan, if you were advising a candidate who said, well, here's my plan, I'm going to destroy New York City, but somehow manage to not own it myself so that I can be the savior who comes in and saves it. It's a very small loophole to be trying to walk through there. The CCP would like to destroy New York City. And if you do some digging on Mamdani, you'll see that he has ties. He's been affiliated with a guy called Neville Singham. Neville Singham runs a bunch of NGOs in New York City that are behind some of the pro-Hamas riots. And Mamdani's been associated with Neville in the past. So I wonder to myself, is Mamdani actually authentic, or is he working on behalf of some destructive / foreign power? I don't know. But to your point, Tom, you scratch your head wondering, like, why the hell does anyone think this is a good idea? I think the people themselves who are implementing these policies don't think it's a good idea. And I think the electorate is still just kind of in a haze, voting blindly, despite the clear and obvious destruction that's happening in their city.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think he's a genuine believer. I think he's the real deal when it comes to like doubling down on communism. And I also do think like whether it's the CCP or the George Soroses of the world, I mean, I do believe there's something far more sinister when it comes to like his backing and putting him in office, like putting in Alvin Bragg and putting in all these other DAs as well. We're going to shift gears.
But before you shift gears, let me just ask you, because there's a circular loop in there, which I'd say, like you say, he's a real deal. He's actually a communist. And I would ask, this isn't 1930 anymore. Like, if you got an actual communist and you said, explain to me how communism is a better solution than a democratic capitalist republic, there's too much information. That experiment has already been tried. So if I asked you to identify a country that has tried communism and show me how it worked, there is no such thing. So an actual communist, when you say he's a true believer, there are communists who advocate for communism because it accrues value and wealth to the people who control the government. So I agree with you. If Mamdani thinks being the guy who runs the Communist Party is good for Mamdani, I would be on board with that. I would have a hard time believing that Mamdani actually thinks that communism is the best solution for the people. There's enough evidence at this point that we can point to throughout human history to show that that's just simply not true.
Yeah, it didn't work for the Soviet Union. It's certainly not going to work for New York City, to say the least. And yeah, so South Shore Press columnist George Santos, we know him well. And I think a lot of people have this false idea of, and John and I, you and I have talked about this. Like if you ask 1,000 people, why is George Santos in jail? And they say, oh, because he's a liar. Well, it's not true. It's not accurate. And to give our listeners and viewers an update, George is in solitary confinement. He's writing a weekly column from inside prison for the South Shore Press. You can go to SSP Newsroom on the Twitter machine and social media. His columns are there. It's on our website, southshorepress.com. Every single week, even with George in solitary confinement, we are still getting correspondence from George, and we're putting it on southshorepress.com and in the print edition of our paper. George recently has been told by his attorney and the authorities that from their perspective, he's received a credible death threat. Law enforcement's investigating, and because of that, George is basically being placed in solitary confinement. He's in a small room, 23 out of 24 hours a day, extremely limited touch, feel, anything with the outside world. So, John, I know you know George as well. So I'm just curious your thoughts about the fact that he's serving a 7-year prison sentence, and now he's in solitary confinement.
Yeah, I think it's a great American tragedy. George is a flawed guy. I mean, as has been documented, I met George because he approached me to donate to his campaign, which I did do. In retrospect, the things that George said to me in that first meeting when I first met him the first time, almost certainly were lies. I mean, it's been well documented. George was making up giant chunks of his resume. I've met many, many politicians and have given money to many, many politicians. What percentage of the politicians that I've given money to do I believe have lied to me? I would guess 100% of them. I mean, I don't
all
know,
of them,
something like that. There are degrees of lying. So if a politician says he intends to save America and do, these are grandiose things that probably have no intention. How many politicians lie about the college they went to or their sexual orientation or things like this? Who knows? But the sequence of events that transpired post George being elected, with his eviction from Congress and then the criminal charges, it's a political hit job. Is George guilty of the things he's been accused of? Almost certainly true. I mean, I think he's confessed to most of it. Does it warrant jail time, period? Does it warrant him being removed from Congress? I mean, as George himself has said, but if you bother to go spend time looking at it, George is the fifth person to ever be expelled from Congress. I think 3 of the 5 were Civil War Confederate generals. So there's not a lot of precedent for a guy being expelled from Congress for lying. Certainly, people don't get expelled from Congress for lying. But even in the face of criminal charges, which there was no indictment at the time that the expulsion movement was first brought to the floor. But there are plenty of people in Congress right now who have criminal charges against them. I shouldn't say plenty, but there are examples of Congress people who have criminal charges against them right now. And there's no even talk of expelling those people. This was a political hit job that was orchestrated by, unfortunately, folks in New York State, and then was piggybacked on by the rest of the party at a point in time where the Democrats, Biden was in power and controlled the DOJ. So they piggybacked on that change of support from the Republican Party to bring criminal charges against him. Now, the sentencing and some of the facts that you just outlined about solitary, it's terribly, terribly tragic. George is a flawed guy, as we all are. But to be in solitary confinement for 7 years in a place where his physical safety is at risk, it honestly breaks my heart. So, I've tried to talk to folks about helping George with a pardon. I personally think that will eventually happen. But I think he's going to be there for a while. And I hope that he can get to the other side of however much time he's going to be there safely.
Yeah, it's Henry Cuellar, who is a Democrat in Texas, who's literally facing, he was indicted, federal charges of bribery and money laundering. And he's still in Congress.
Not only in Congress, he was just reelected.
Right. The people of Texas, what the hell are you doing?
Well, but again, look, we live in a democracy. So if people want to vote for Henry Cuellar, then they should vote for Henry Cuellar. I mean, I have no issue with that. Just as I would have no issue with the people of New York voting for George Santos. I mean, that is what happened. The hypocrisy of that dynamic is there was widespread outrage being voiced by other members of Congress, particularly the New York members, about how it was a stain on Congress to have George sitting there under, the pretense of what at the time was just criminal speculation, eventually an indictment, eventually a conviction. And if you were to try to find examples of sitting congressmen voicing any outrage or opposition at all to Henry Cuellar, you'd find that there is zero. No one has bothered to ever speak of it. So, I think we've asked the question in the paper, the people who said that we needed to get George Santos out of Congress because of his criminal situation, why does that logic not also apply to Henry Cuellar? And no, of course, there's no answer to that question, which is, look, politics is a nasty business. So you want to knife a guy in the back because, he did something you didn't like. Okay, that's fine. But now the guy, you want to get him out of Congress, I'd say that's the name of the game, and George signed up for that. Putting a guy in jail for 7 years in a dangerous jail where the need becomes that he has to be in solitary confinement. Now we're taking this a little bit too far. That's not politics. Let's take a step back and be Christians or people of God and understand George is a human being with a family. And lying or whatever it is that he was accused of or is guilty of does not merit the punishment that he's got. It's completely asymmetric.
Yeah, and George's recent letter, which I just received this morning, is now on southshorepress.com. It's going to be in the print edition on October 8th that folks can see that across Suffolk County. And here's like an interesting twist, guys, when it comes to the issue of George Santos being in solitary confinement. Out of the blue, the South Shore Press to our news inbox received correspondence from Joe Exotic, the Tiger King, like the Tiger King from Netflix fame, who is currently in prison. He's also in federal prison. And unbeknownst to us, some way, somehow, his attorneys were going on southshorepress.com and they were printing all of George's articles and sending the South Shore Press articles of George Santos behind bars and in solitary confinement to the Tiger King, Joe Exotic, at his federal prison. And then I got an email from his attorney and he's like, hey, do you want to talk to Joe? I'm like, yeah, of course. I mean, who wouldn't, despite his circumstances? I mean, he's in federal prison for a pretty hardcore crime, but I'm like,
what is Joe Exotic in prison for?
Tom, I think it was for his actual charge, I believe, had to do with Carol Baskin, which he, of course, denies. His arch enemy, his nemesis, of him basically plotting to kill her. Which, like, I got to say, guys, I did not have, like, talk to Joe Exotic on my 2025 bingo card.
Wait, and forgive me, Carol Baskin, like, ran a competing tiger business or something?
That's correct. Yeah. Tom, did you watch the Netflix series at all?
Oh yeah. We binge watched it. It was hard to turn off once you get sucked in. It was that was one of those COVID kind of watching. Yeah. So basically, he didn't like Carol. He she had a competing situation. They were at odds. They would go on social media and rip each other apart and steal each other's employees and back and forth. And then it just got to a point where apparently Joe hired somebody to go kill Carol. Is
that bad?
Yeah,
can't do that.
And what is Stefan? Do you know how long he's in jail for that? So he was guilty of conspiring for murder or something like this. Is that the charge? Probably.
Yeah, it says he was convicted of a murder for hire plot against Carol Baskin. He was originally sentenced to 22 years in prison, but he got resentenced to 21 years. Okay. So he's in for a long time.
Well, the irony, as you were relaying that, you're saying a person is guilty of plotting to destroy his competition. And is that talking about Joe Exotic or Nick LaLota? I'm not sure who we're talking about there.
No, that was out loud.
Now Joe Exotic hired someone to like put a bullet in her head. The New York Republicans just put him in jail where he'd be knifed by a rapist or something like this. So I think that Joe Exotic should learn some lessons but the next time he wants to destroy somebody.
Yeah, come to Suffolk County. But it was just so interesting because, again, his lawyer was like, and as a journalist, again, news director of the South Shore Press, I'm like, of course I'll talk to the guy. Like, but it was the strangest parameters because obviously he's in federal prison. And he told me, according to Joe Exotic, can't believe those words ever came out of my mouth, that I had a conversation with him. But yeah, he said he was in solitary confinement for 2 years and 8 months because he had like similar threats. So his lawyer was like, hey, there can't be a set time where he calls you. And he's only allowed a phone call. And he's going to wait 30 minutes. And it's going to be from this 202 area code. You punch a certain number and then you can start talking. But you only have 15 minutes.
Did he call you collect or was he putting quarters in the payphone?
No, I think he's got like, it's almost like commissary, I think, where you pay like a certain amount and then you get a credit. So he gets 15 minutes credits for every phone call. I can't believe I know this. But now I do.
And I asked you this when you brought this to my attention a couple of days ago, and the thing that struck me is that, and I tell my sons this, that you can tell a lot about a person by who their friends are. And the question I asked you for George is, are you sure? Like, I don't know anything about Joe Exotic, so for all I know, he could be the sweetest guy on earth. I don't know. But if I found myself in trouble, I hope I've got some better, some folks, not the Joe Exotics of the world, calling from prison to advocate on my behalf.
That's the life of George Santos.
Stefan, you got to start binge watching Oz.
Right. This is my life. But hey, you know what, folks? Go to SouthShorePress.com. Joe wrote a letter to George Santos. It's right there. It's going to be in the print edition this week. So it was strange for me because like I had to set up like this podcast studio that I have in my home office and like just be ready, like, because I didn't know when he was calling me. And they said, oh, it might be around this time. And it wound up being like half an hour before. So like I rushed down, the clock is ticking. And we did a phone interview with Joe Exotic, the Tiger King. And right now, guys, we will play it for our listeners. And this is not edited. You're going to hear throughout this phone call, like the automatic person coming in saying, this is a call from a federal prison. So like, this is like legit. This is the real deal. And like, I went through numerous lengths to make sure that like the letter was from Joe Exotic. I checked with his attorneys via social media. So like here, we're going to play it right now in its entirety. The SouthShorePress.com exclusive with Joe Exotic on George Santos. How did you find out that George Santos was penning letters for the South Shore Press behind prison bars? How'd you find out about it?
My people copied and pasted his letters that he writes to you and emailed them to me.
And what are your thoughts on reading George's content, what he wrote about? What reaction did you have since you're literally in the same shoes that he is.
I'm kind of disappointed in the way that he's being treated, but it doesn't surprise me because I spent 2 years and 8 months in solitary confinement at the beginning of all of this. And the sad part is if somebody has threatened him, what they call protective custody is basically torture because you're locked in a room 23, 24 hours a day by yourself, no TV, no radio, hard to get even hygiene materials out of the people that run the shoe. It's torture. It's literally torture. But, Stefan, the thing that makes my knowledge different than most people that advocate for prison reform and how George is being treated and how I was treated when I was in solitary confinement is I was licensed by the United States Department of Agriculture to own a zoo, okay? And under the Animal Welfare Act, right, for a chimpanzee, for one chimpanzee, you have to have 400 square feet inside and out.
This call is from a federal prison.
800 square feet, and the chimpanzee has to have the right to go in and out as he chooses, all right? And then he has to have 10% of his body weight of fresh, wholesome, nutritious food every day. So say a chimp weighs 150 pounds, that's 15 pounds of food, okay, a day. Then they have to have either a TV or a radio, enrichment toys changed out every day. And every time you add another chimp, you have to add another 800 square feet. A human being, like where George is right now, under federal law, is 70 square feet for a human being, okay, to be locked in a room. And then only 2,000 calories a day. And unfortunately, the federal prison system, the BOP, supplements those calories. In order to get the 2,000 calories, they serve you a lot of cookies and a lot of cake that's high in calories because the food is pathetic. You can't even live on just what they give you. All right, so they supplement your calorie intake with cookies and cake, and then they wonder why everybody has to go get a diabetes shot before they eat every day. It's insane that our politicians take more money from animal rights people and we treat animals better in this country than we do a human being.
So, Joe, you were in solitary confinement for more than 2 years, and George has only been in for a few weeks. Mentally, can you help our listeners and viewers have a better understanding of what exactly he's going through mentally? Because you did it for over 2 years, being in solitary confinement.
When you first get put in there, he's only been in there for a few weeks, so it hasn't really had time to sink in. And being that they are calling that protected custody, God knows how long he's going to be in there. I wish that y'all could advocate and get him moved to somewhere where I'm at now, because where I'm at is kind of like a college campus. It's an administrative center, and there's no bars or no cells. We live in dorms. But give him another 3 or 4 weeks, and he will lay there. I laid there every day praying to God that my heart would stop, because the torture of being taken from a social society and locked in a room with nothing but your own mind to drive you crazy, it's literally torture. I laid there for 2 years praying to die.
And now let's talk President Trump. I know from a purely political perspective, Joe, people could have the mindset of, you know what, if there's any pardons coming for people like you, for George Santos, it'll come after the midterm. So there's no supposed political pushback or blowback. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's possible that you and George Santos will get a pardon, but it's going to come after the midterms? Have you thought about that?
I have some pretty influential lawyers. One of my lawyers is Levi McCatherine with the Dallas Cowboys, the attorney for the Dallas Cowboys. And then I have Roger Roots and John Phillips. The word has it that the pardons should have already came, but unfortunately they're having some kind of problems with the deputy attorney general right now. I look for more pardons to come before Christmas, actually, before the holidays, because especially someone like me, if he would pardon me before the midterms, I could dominate the news for a solid 6 months. And I don't even need a pardon. I'll take the clemency because, my president is a felon. So even though I'm innocent, just give me time served and let me go because I can go do my business and carry on with life with this still hanging over my head. I don't care because I look up to President Trump that much. And he's the president of the United States after what they've done to him. But if they were to, give me and George either pardons or clemency, commute our sentences down to time served, between the two of us, we could dominate the Republican election for the midterms. That would be the best thing that they could do.
From a federal prison.
Right now, with what's going on out in the world with the ICE people and the immigration and Donald Trump blowing boats out of the water, I really don't think pardoning me and George before the midterms would actually hurt anybody.
Well, let's talk about George's case specifically, too, because a lot of people are saying, even George would tell me, hey, look, I did wrong. Yes, I should pay. But 7 years seems excessive. What are your thoughts on the fact that he's in solitary confinement right now and he's going to serve 7 years for the crimes that he committed?
Yeah, it's crazy. I would never have believed it until I came to federal prison. How many child molesters are in here and sex offenders? And I've been with child molesters that had 2 hands-on victims that only served 5 years. They only got 5-year sentences. George didn't touch nobody. All he done was he lied and made some stuff up. That's like me. Hell, the only thing I actually really did in my case, because they've all admitted to perjury on world television on season 2 of Tiger King, I euthanized 5 tigers after my vet told me to. 21 years? Do I really deserve 21 years when child molesters are getting out in 5? Murderers are getting out in 16? Our system is so ass backwards, and they wonder why they have to move troops into all these different cities to cut down the crime. They'll move the National Guard into Chicago or Washington, D.C., and they'll arrest these people, and they'll be back out on the street in 2 or 3 months. Instead, they've got the prisons full of people like me and George that are a threat to no one.
You mentioned President Trump before, Joe. I'm sure you're reading about current events in the news, cracking down on immigration, securing the border. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on his presidency so far?
I admire President Trump. I wish that he would back up more of his threats. Job on the border. Even though I'm married to an illegal immigrant, George came in, my husband's name is George too, he came into America the wrong way, and he deserved to be deported. But, I've put out in the press, I don't know how many times, that when I make it out of here, I'm going to work my ass off to be able to afford one of Trump's gold cards to get him back into America the right way. And if it costs me $5 million, it costs me $5 million. But I think he's doing a good job. I know he's making a lot of enemies right now because, the Democrats and the people that are for the illegal immigrants to be in our country are all up in an uproar. I think as a person that grew up on a farm with illegal Mexicans working the farm, my whole childhood, I was raised with illegal Mexicans because that's how we farmed. I wish President Trump and Congress would do something for the ones that work in the agriculture division, because I think 6 months down the road, you're going to see that affect grocery prices and food prices dramatically, because you're just not going to find any white or black people that are going to go work in the fields or lay asphalt on a highway when it's 105 degrees outside. You're just not going to do it. I don't care how much you pay them.
What is your passionate plea to President Trump when it comes to your case and the case of George Santos?
President Trump, Don Jr., even advocated for me to get a pardon because he saw on television what was really true and what really wasn't. But We have their cell phones now, and it's all been put on the website, joeexoticofficial.com. Have somebody take an hour and watch season 2 of Tiger King, where they all admitted to perjury, and they admitted that they had a plot to kill me in order to get my zoo. I've lost 8 years of my life. I've lost my parents. I've lost 55 years of hard work. Never even had a speeding ticket. I just want to move on past this, and I wish you would give me a second chance at life before this cancer takes me out. God bless everybody, and I appreciate your support, Stefan, and I will stay in touch with you and see if we can't make it a little better for George Santos, too.
So you just heard it there on the South Shore Press podcast, our inaugural edition. And again, all of this can be found on our Twitter page at SSP Newsroom, and the website is southshorepress.com. Yeah, guys, I cannot stress enough. I never had in my wildest dreams on my bingo card of getting letters from George Santos from solitary confinement and putting in the South Shore Press and having a lengthy interview with Joe Exotic, the Tiger King. My wife is pretty excited when I told her, and she's like, I'm telling all my friends. And I sent her the YouTube link, which is on the South Shore Press YouTube page, and like everybody in my family.
Is your wife a fan? Like, does Joe Exotic have fans? Or the people who like are fans of Joe Exotic?
Oh, huge. Oh, yeah. There's like Twitter pages, websites. I mean, it's almost, John, I don't want to use the phrase like cult following, but
what's the counterbalance? So on one hand, you just told me that he plotted to murder his competition. What's the counterbalance? What's the good version?
Their version is he didn't do it. That basically, and even in the phone call that we just heard, Joe Exotic was like, yeah, I put down 5 tigers, because that was one of the charges that he got hit with, because he basically euthanized 5 tigers that he claims his vet told him to do, but that violated whatever federal law. And that's one of the things that he's in prison. But yeah, his followers and his hardcore believers are like, this guy didn't do it. He's framed. Carol Baskin's a nut job, in their words, in that he's innocent. And Joe, as you just heard, was basically saying in season 2 of Tiger King that a lot of the people who made claims against him recanted and they went back on it. But like, yeah, Tom, you hit the nail on the head. It was like during COVID, like he just exploded. Like it was the show to watch during COVID. So yeah, it's like, John, these folks are rabid supporters. And the whole reason him reaching out to us is basically to raise awareness for George's plight. Like he wasn't kind of like, woe is me, help me. He was all about helping George and like saying like, solitary is no joke. You're going to go nuts. I wish I died. And his hope is to basically get a pardon from President Trump or a commutation. But my gut feeling is, guys, like, I think that's going to happen. John, you mentioned this before too. Like, I don't see it happening before the midterms from a purely political perspective. Like, I just don't see the president of the United States before the midterm saying, I'm going to pardon both Joe Exotic and George Santos. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with the Joe Exotic situation, so I can't. I mean, I wouldn't comment on it. But in the George case, it's one of these things where public perception actually matters. So you mentioned at the beginning of what you said about George, which is if you asked 10 people on the street why George Santos is in jail, you would most commonly hear that he's there because he lied. Which of course, George did lie, but lying is not illegal, and it's in fact quite commonplace amongst congressmen. But you'd also hear from people, including our own listeners and readers, that George got what he deserved. And if you ask someone to explain that relationship, got what you deserve means I did this thing, and this is justice for that thing. And again, we live in our country is not brand new, so there's precedent for virtually every situation. And you wouldn't be able to find somebody who's gotten what George has gotten for the thing that George did. So it's clearly not just. But the public perception matters because, as you said, George's pardon being timed perhaps around the midterms, you say, well, why the hell is that? But sure, like, what does George's pardon have to do with the midterms? And the answer is that it would be politically disadvantageous at the moment to pardon George because the public perception is that George is a criminal and therefore deserves to be in jail. So I think anybody who's looked at the facts objectively would say that a very serious miscarriage of justice has taken place, and George is therefore in solitary, going through probably some version of hell on earth. But the politics of pardoning him just simply are not there. the president, of course, very famously pardoned a lot of the J6 folks when he first got into office. And that was because the public perception already existed that those people had been unfairly treated. And that perception simply doesn't exist in Georgia's case for whatever reason.
Well, a lot of that content, again, southshorepress.com, and for folks across Suffolk County who pick up the hard copy of the paper at various locations across Suffolk County, South Shore Press, a lot of this info is going to be there. Tom, now let's talk sports. And we talk Yankees before at the top of our podcast. I'm curious for both of you guys, because now we are going to talk sports. That basically, again, you guys are baseball guys. I'm more of like a hockey and football guy. So Yankees, Blue Jays. Tom, again, you are a nationally known and nationally respected sports betting expert. So now let's talk Yankees, Blue Jays. Just what are your initial thoughts on what this series is going to look like?
Well, for you Toronto folks, I've been wrong for a month now, but I wasn't that wrong. In the beginning of August, I've gone on national radio shows almost weekly saying the Yankees are going to catch Toronto. I don't buy into this Toronto team. I don't buy into their pitching. I think they have weak starting pitching. I think their bullpen is still in flux. When I look at a situation, a team against a team, what I generally look at is looking at it from another team. And this is before the Yankees were head-to-head with Toronto. I said, if I have my batters up and it's a close game and I see Jeff Hoffman leaving the bullpen, I'm happy as a batter. I'm happy as a fan base, right? He's given up a lot of home runs this year. He's given up a lot of big hits. His ERA was hovering around 5 for a lot of the summer. The Toronto Blue Jays are a good team, but they're not a scary team. And there's a difference there. They don't have the shutdown ace that you're looking at and you're going, a Scooble type where you go, that game's going to basically not work out like Crochet just had. They don't have that. They don't have the masher in the middle of the lineup. Oh, Vlad Guerrero is a fantastic player, but they don't have that scary, Aaron Judge type or Shohei Ohtani type in the middle of the lineup. They don't have that. They don't have superior defense. They don't have superior bullpen. They're a good, solid baseball team. That doesn't mean that they're a scary team. And I think that that's the advantage that the Yankees have over them. When you look at the New York Yankees and you look at their 1, 2, 3 in the rotation, it's downright scary. The fact that they could throw Max Fried twice in this series is downright scary. The New York Yankees have scary batters in the middle, from Judge to Stanton to Chisholm to Bellinger, scary guys that can end a game right away. The problem with the Yankees, of course, is the back end of the bullpen is still a question mark, and they do, for a lot of the year, have fielding issues. So there's holes on both teams. There's problems with both teams. But my initial response with the Toronto Blue Jays is what my response was in late July, mid-July, all the way through. And I said, whoever plays them doesn't have to face the fear factor because they just don't have that top of the rotation guy. They don't have the shutdown closer. They have a weaker bullpen, and they don't have that scary guy in the middle of the lineup.
Yeah, John, I mean, obviously you're like hardcore into fantasy baseball. You're as much of a diehard as Tom is. I'm just curious, as like a sports fan and someone who really knows in-depth baseball, like what are your thoughts on the upcoming series?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a team the Yankees should beat. Toronto, if they finished with the exact same record, Toronto played over their head for most of the year. They got some outlier performances from Bo Bichette, George Springer, Hoffman, has been good in the past. Actually had a good first half of the season. It's been terrible in the second half. And now Bichette's going to miss this series. Bichette, perhaps next to Vlad, probably their best hitter, will be out for this series. And you look at it, anytime you're looking at a series like this, you're looking at how does the starting pitching stack up, how does the bullpen stack up, how does the lineup stack up, and then how do they stack up defensively? And the Yankees are going to go. That first game, Louis Seal, that's the question. Like if we can get a start out of Louis Seal, the series is over. Because after you get through that, it's probably going to be Gausman versus Heel in game 1. That would probably be advantage Toronto just in terms of the starting pitching. But then we go Fried, Rodon, Schlittler, Fried against, they're going to throw Shane Bieber. They've got this guy, what's his name? Trey Savage, who's got a beautiful baseball name, throws very hard, like a Savage. But the rotations just don't stack up. The bullpen, Hoffman, as bad as he's been, is probably their best arm in the pen. And the lineup, you got Vlad and a bunch of guys who've kind of played over their heads. So it's a team we should beat. I'd love to see Heel throw a game on Saturday. The pen will be rested, so if you can give us 5 innings, that should be enough. And if you can get through that game, you hand it over to Fried and these guys, and it should be a team. As Tom said, Toronto's not a team that scares you. Nor is Detroit. So Seattle scares me. Yeah. If we find ourselves playing Seattle in the ALCS, that team is stacked. The GM of that team did a great job making some additions at the trade deadline. Up and down the team, it's a very well balanced, very stacked team. That team, I think, could give us some trouble. Toronto's a team we should beat.
Tom, what are your thoughts? Who do you not want to face?
Yeah, it's actually pretty funny. It's exactly what you said, John. I was on Fox Sports Radio and the day before the trade deadline, and I said, man, if the Mariners go out there and make the right moves, they're the scariest team in baseball. Forget about the American League. And they did it. They have absolute bona fide studs in the middle of the road of that lineup. When you look at Cal Raleigh and what he did this year, and he wasn't even the best hitter since the trade deadline on. It's been J-Rod, right? And you have the additions that they made with Suarez with 40-plus home runs, and no one's talking about him. Their starting pitching 1 through 5 is probably the best in the American League. And their 8-9 guys, from Brash to Munoz, are by far the best 8-9 guys in the entire major leagues. I mean, they are shut down. So Seattle is a very, very scary team. Detroit, they have Skubal.
Skubal and pray for rain. That's
it really is. So, for me, we are now Detroit fans if you're a Yankee fan. And the Yankees are in a position. They are minus 135 to win the series. I thought it should be about 160, but because of what Toronto did during the year, people are buying a little bit into Toronto. I'm not afraid of Toronto. I'm not afraid of Detroit. But as John said, Seattle gets dicey.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you boil it down to those 4 things, lineup, starting pitching, bullpen, and defense, you'd be hard-pressed to find one of those 4 that you'd give the advantage to the Yankees against Seattle. That's a tricky one. Now, look, anybody can win a series, so anything can happen. But, let's just get there first, and we'll see what happens. We'll talk about that next week.
And, Tom, I know you're a big fan of Aaron Boone. Huge fan. Number 1 fan right there. Oh. Is it like for your smirk just gives it away? But is that so in the upcoming series? Is it a case of and look, I am nowhere near a hardcore baseball fan like you guys, and I don't have your depth of knowledge. But is this a case of him just kind of getting out of the way and letting pitchers pitch and letting players play and not committing an unforced error? Pardon the pun.
In all honesty, look, I put a lot of the blame on Boone, but it is the entire Yankee developmental idea that analytics deserve to be part of this. You took 57 home runs out of the lineup in Chisholm and Rice in game 1 because, the analytics said so. So I think Boone gets his calling orders from the top, but I have not liked the job that Boone has had for years. I mean, you've heard me scream and yell, fire him in the middle of a game. It is what he did with Max Fried. I think he learned the difference with Cam last night, right? I mean, he really did. He said, I'm going to go with my guy. This guy is pushing. He's doing what has to be done. There you go. Last night, they're facing a lefty. Analytics probably said to sit down Jazz Chisholm and sit down Ben Rice. He didn't do it. So there's the small hope. Oh, I can't believe I'm saying it. I'm gonna eat my words. But there's a small hope that maybe Aaron Boone is learning here. But I don't think so. I think he gets the orders from the top, and when push comes to shove, he's going to remove the pitcher and put in a guy that he feels like the analytics say he's going to probably start somebody in the series that we all don't like. And it's not second guessing, Stefan. It's first guessing in a lot of these situations. Boone has made a lot of these problems. So when you're talking about, the idea, does a manager make a difference? In baseball, not really. In a playoff series, it starts to get a little bit more. But we've seen time and time again, Boone does make a difference.
No, Boone definitely makes a difference. I mean, and look, in the manager, and in Boone's case specifically, it's the lineup, which, to Tom's point, maybe that's coming from upstairs. I don't know, but the lineup in game 1 is crazy to me. The idea that you're going to throw Rosario, Caballero, who else do they have in there? Goldie, fine. But these guys hit lefties well, but it's Garrett Crochet. So, Rosario's not going to hit Garrett Crochet. So I'd rather take my chances with Jazz and Rice. Jazz works a walk. He can steal second. So I don't get the game 1, but it's the lineup is bucket 1 for the manager. It's the in-game decisions, which Boone is just wrought with mistakes, going back to the famous lead, bringing in Nestor Cortez to face Ohtani last year in the World Series with Tim Hill sitting there warming up directly beside him, and Nestor hadn't pitched in a month. And that's just an example of Boone. Like, one of his calling cards with the players is he's loyal to his guys, and Nestor was his guy, and he wanted to give Nestor the chance to come in a big spot. And Nestor famously gave up the walk-off to Freeman. But, that happens time and time again. And then the third bucket, which just drives me crazy, is, I coach a Little League team. The Yankees are one of the worst coached teams I think I've ever seen in Major League Baseball. The number of base running mistakes and fielding mistakes these guys make, and I'm not talking about Volpe airmailing a throw from short. That's a physical mistake. It's fine. You're talking about mental errors, guys not being prepared to play the game, which, look, that's on the players, because you would think a guy's in the major leagues, he's played infinity baseball games, he's been coached infinity times, and you'd think you'd come to play every single day. But they're obviously not prepared to play, and that's got to be on the manager. You saw the other day in Game 1, a huge play in the game was the single up the middle. I forget which guy from the Reds, one of the guys at the bottom of the order, singled up the middle, almost hit Fried in the head. So it's directly up the middle, and the guy stretches it into a double because Grisham and Judge are just kind of loafing after it. Now Judge happens to pick it up. Okay, he's got a bum arm, so they've decided they're going to run on Judge's arm. But if Grisham or Judge charge that hard and pick it up fast, the guy's not going for second, and that guy ended up scoring. So you have a lot of those just lackadaisical, non-fundamental miscues that just get amplified. You can do that in July, and you lose a game here or there, and nobody really cares. You give up a game in a 5-game series or 3-game series or a 7-game series. That's the difference between winning and losing. You go back to the World Series last year, we probably gave away Game 1 for sure, and then had a bunch of mistakes in that famous Game 5 that we should have been back in LA, and who knows, maybe we'll win that title if we don't have those mental mistakes. And I put those squarely on Boone, unfortunately.
And John, I'm sorry, Stefan, even last night, in a win, a lot of those mistakes, it's not just Boone, it's the coaching staff. He didn't send Stanton from third base, on a looper where nobody thought that the right field was going to catch it. Didn't send Stanton. All right, it's Stanton. Yep. The next play, he doesn't send Rosario. They airmail it past third base. Those are 2 runs that they eventually scored. No big deal. Gets lost in the box score, lost in translation. But if they lost that game, I'm pointing back to the third base coach, and I'm going, why aren't you sending those guys? What are you doing? And so, it's bad reads, it's bad coaching, and that coaching has come back and bit the Yankees, and that's why the Yankees are not defending World Series champions.
And look, the I always feel bad advocating that someone lose their job. So I hate to go down that path, but the conversation we're having right now is the conversation that's happening amongst every Yankee fan for the last 2 years. So everybody knows this stuff is happening. The stuff continues to happen. And it's one of these situations where, in baseball, it's one of the odd major sports where you still have these major salary discrepancies between the big markets and the small markets. So you can make up for a lot of bullshit with a $300 million payroll. And I think Boone, will continue to get the benefit of the doubt, because here we are in the LDS. Let's say they get past Toronto. Even if they were to lose in the ALCS, the management, the Steinbrenner's are going to sit down in the offseason and say, well, he got us to the LCS. Okay, good job, Aaron. And it's like, no, you have to, forget the win-loss record. Let's look at some of the actual, you said, what impact does the manager have on a baseball game? The answer should be very little. There should be very little impact. It's like an umpire. You shouldn't notice the impact the manager had on the game. But here we are, time and time again, particularly in very big spots, where we're talking about the thing that Aaron Boone did last night. And we just shouldn't be doing that.
And John, you go back, you said Steinbrenner, go back to 1995. Buck Showalter brings this team back to relevancy, best record before the shutdown in 94, brings him back to the playoffs. Buck Showalter decides to pitch to Ken Griffey Jr., loses that series because he goes to Jack McDowell when he's got Mariano Rivera sitting in the bullpen, ironically. And guess what happens? The guy that brought them back to relevancy, fires Buck Showalter in 95 because, you know what? I don't like your decision not to pitch to, or not to walk Ken Griffey Jr. and to pitch to him. And he fired him and created a dynasty. That is the kind of leadership we need here, where be held accountable. Boone should not have been the coach of this team because of the Nestor Cortez situation. He's got another chance here. So I don't care how far he goes. Unless he gets a ring, you got to get rid of him.
I tend to agree with you. And then you bring up the George Steinbrenner, the boss. Boone would be gone a long time ago.
Yeah.
And so would Cashman. So look, it's a tricky thing inside an organization. You sit down, you're going to sit across, these guys are all friends with each other. You're going to sit across the table from Aaron Boone. You want to fire Aaron Boone. I understand that's not an easy thing for one human to do to another human. But if you're just looking at it just objectively, it's been bad. He's done a bad job. And look, the players seem to like him. So, I think that probably plays a role in this. But if Steinbrenner Sr. were here, for sure he'd be gone. It wouldn't surprise me, even if they got a ring this year, Steinbrenner Sr. would still fire him.
Yeah.
And so certainly hoping for a Yankees victory over Toronto. And again, as I shared with Tom, the only two games that I watched are the two games that the Yankees won. So, and John, by the way, just to let you know, I'm not sure if you're aware of this. Again, before we get to Bob Chardick from the South Shore Press, our news reporter, Tom's favorite book is Moneyball, and his favorite general manager is Billy Beane. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know.
Billy Beane, who stole everything from Stick Michael.
Tom actually got in a fight with that guy on the radio. Didn't you get in a fight with him on the radio?
Yeah, I did.
With Beane, you got into a fight with him?
Yeah, I did. He don't like me very much, and I don't like him. So yeah, you go out there and you blast away at Billy Beane long enough on Vegas radio, and they had their minor league team. The Aviators were a part of the A's. Eventually, you might get a call from a guy that's Billy Beane on the air. Doesn't like you calling him out. But the reality is that, the movie's pure garbage. It's pure fiction. Well, what he did was garbage. He never got a ring. He stole every idea from Stick Michael, who did get rings. But you know what? You have Brad Pitt play the guy. So, everybody loves Billy Beane.
All right, baseball talk is over. Now we're turning to local news and the dean of South Shore Reporters in Suffolk County, Bob Chardick. Guys, let's welcome Bob to the podcast. Bob, how are you?
Very good. It's good to be on with you guys.
John, I got to say, every time I meet Bob for coffee and we go over show notes and we go over what's going in the week's paper, he looks nothing like that.
No, it's got to be Bob's stuntman that you brought in. His body double.
My doppelganger. He does all the writing. I just sit back and let it happen.
Bob looks homeless. He cloned someone and he dressed up and he looks good. So Bob, there were two big stories in the South Shore Press newspaper. Again, our website is southshorepress.com. On the Twitter machine, it's at SSP Newsroom. Bob, let's talk about the first one. Historic drug bust. Biggest ever in Suffolk County. Can you let our listeners and viewers know exactly what that entailed?
Yes, District Attorney Ray Tierney had a press conference in his office in Hauppauge, and it was funny, on the way into the building, and everybody remarked on it, you could smell the marijuana and the drugs, and you kind of led into the press conference. And he had a table laid out, probably 6 or 7 tables with all kinds of drugs. And some of it was the methamphetamine, and it was the largest meth bust in Suffolk history, 14 kilos.
Hold on, Bob. I got to interrupt you for a second because, guys, I think Bob was mistaken. He wasn't in Tierney's office. He was just walking through Manhattan. I think that's what happened.
So what was the magnitude of did they quantify how much drugs they seized? How did they do that?
$2 million worth of drugs, everything from meth to black tar heroin. They had fentanyl, enough fentanyl to kill tens of thousands of people. It was one of the largest drug busts in Suffolk County history.
And where did they do the bust? Do we know?
It was a couple. They were operating out of a rented house in Holbrook. And the crazy part was they had tried to outsmart the police and were driving around in a surplus police vehicle. So they kind of caught the attention of the neighborhood. The detectives staked it out. They made a couple buys. They got a search warrant based on the buys and found an enormous amount of drugs. And it wasn't just drugs. I think it was $180,000 in cash, weapons, scales, pill pressers. It was a major drug operation that was ended by the Suffolk police and detectives and Suffolk County DA Ray Tierney.
And Bob, just on that story, do we know who these guys are? Are they local Suffolk County people, or where are they from?
Yeah, it was a local couple. They were renting out of Holbrook. I'm not sure where they're from originally. And then the trail led to a warehouse in East Patchogue where the father of the defendant had an auto body business. And in that warehouse, they found 80 pounds of marijuana.
Wow. Did Ray disclose where the drugs were coming from, or how'd they get so much drugs?
Well, yes. So the next part of the investigation is to go up the food chain. They want to try to link it to some cartels. As we know in this country, the cartels coming out of Mexico and South America are funneling tons of drugs into the United States. You saw the videos from President Trump released about blowing up the drug ships from Venezuela. So a huge amount of drugs are entering this country. They're finding their way to Long Island. And thankfully, we have a district attorney that's not part of the woke gang that thinks that's okay, and they're cracking down on it.
Now, did Ray Tierney just blow up their house, or did he go and serve them and arrest
Well, he
them?
wanted to. The president was recommending it. No. Yep. So they just shut it down. But it was crazy. It's hard to grasp the amount of drugs that were seized. There was just a small sample of it laid out on the table in the press conference. But, 14 kilos of meth, that's enough to kill a lot of people.
And Bob, I'm just curious when it comes to these two suspects. I mean, they don't seem to be the sharpest tools in the shed. If their mode of transportation was an old police car, I mean, I'm sure Tierney talked about that, and the cops talked about that a lot during the press conference.
Yeah, and the big concern is when they first discovered it, they thought another branch of law enforcement was already investigating them. So they had to back off a little bit and check with the DEA and the FBI to see if there wasn't another law enforcement agency involved.
All right, Bob, and another big story you're working on for the South Shore Press. Again, the website is southshorepress.com. County Executive Ed Romaine, police officials. Walk us through the $600,000 spent on drones that's going to help law enforcement. What's that story about?
Yeah, I covered the press conference with Suffolk County Executive Ed Romaine and the Police Commissioner Kevin Catalina in Yaphank, and they unveiled the new drones. So it was a $600,000 grant from the state of New York. They bought 5 drones. It's $30,000 per drone, but a lot of that money was spent on infrastructure. So now they have the computer network, the training, the monitors. They're all set up to add additional drones, which have fantastic capabilities. So it's pretty exciting. They did a demonstration at the press conference, and it was police officers, acting out a shopping center car burglary ring. So the message there is lock your doors. So these guys were going through the parking lot checking doors. And if your door's unlocked, they'll try to steal whatever's in there. So they got a call in this demonstration, 9/11 call, which they played, they dramatized it. Burglary in underway, and the drone took off. The drone got there within under a minute. So you could see the drone flight from where it took off right to the scene, and saw these guys, checking doors. The cops were on their way. They guided the police officers right to the two suspects. They had a description, and they made the bust right then and there. And the interesting part, and they pointed this out, the initial call said that they had a gun, and it turned out the drone identified in the man's hand it wasn't a gun, it was his cell phone. And that really changed the dynamic. And they made a point of this. They said, the cops could have been going to a case where one of the perps had a gun. So the drone really helped out in this instance.
And these drones are being used for just general surveillance, or are they being deployed to a suspected crime scene?
Both. They're on call. So if a call comes in, 9/11, the drone can get on the scene very rapidly. County Executive Romaine was very impressed by the infrared technology of the drone for missing people. So let's say a child goes missing in the woods or at a county park. It'll pick up the heat signature day or night, and they'll be able to locate missing people very rapidly. The drones can read license plates. They have a mapping system where they can lay out a map of an area or a neighborhood, and it's all controlled centrally in Yaphank at the Suffolk County Emergency Control Center. So you have staff there seeing what the drone is seeing. That information can be relayed to the police car en route, or searchers, or whoever's involved in the situation. but it's eyes in the sky, John, and apparently from the demonstration, it should work very well.
Okay,
I
good.
can see it being helpful too. Like you mentioned kids being lost, Bob, but like you always get these alerts and it just breaks your heart. The elderly, Alzheimer's patients, folks struggling with Parkinson's, these folks leave, and a lot of times it's a very just horrible outcome. So did the police or the county executive talk about, hey, it's not just kids, but like we get these alerts of, hey, someone with dementia left, we need to find them. It's just they talk about this being another tool.
Oh, absolutely. And the drones have cameras, very high tech, strong lenses, which can be controlled. So you could zoom in, you could zoom out. If the drone experiences a problem with communications or it starts to run low on battery life, it'll return by itself back to its base. It has built-in technology to avoid obstructions, like it won't run into a plane or a building. And if something goes very, very wrong, it has a parachute, so it'll lower itself safely to the ground if there's a problem.
Bob,
That's interesting.
is there any markings on them for us to know that they're like from the police? I mean, you see all the funny things about people throwing things at the drones or trying to shoot it out of the sky because they just don't want it hovering over them. Is there something that's going to differentiate, and we would know that it's not a privatized?
I didn't notice that. On your point, the operators, the county had to get special dispensation from the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, to operate the drones, and they would have permission to be closer to an airport or other restricted areas because they have that special dispensation.
All right, Bob, greatly appreciate the update. And guys, that's the going to wrap up our first inaugural edition of the South Shore Press podcast. Again, the website is southshorepress.com. You can pick us up at numerous locations across Suffolk County. John, Tom, any last thoughts other than go Yankees?
Well, you got to get your Buffalo Bills in order there, Stefan. They put out a tweet saying good luck to our friends of the North and Toronto Blue Jay. This is the only New York team. Come on, that's your Bills.
Buffalo's essentially Canada, isn't it? Isn't that
At this point, they should just annex it.
Look, the four of us can go and like cross the border, plant a flag, and Canada be the 51st state. I mean, who are you kidding? But, there's a huge and there is a professional partnership with the Bills in Toronto, like so, and also they don't want the Bills to move to Toronto, so like they're playing nice with our neighbors to the north up there too. So, all right, guys, again, the website southshorepress.com. Greatly appreciate all of our listeners and folks that stuck around. The Twitter page is at SSP Newsroom. Greatly appreciate you joining us.